Hello again, and welcome to the review of Chapter 8 for USVA History. Let me give you a little update about how I think the best way for you to do this would be. Don't necessarily have your class notes out and expect to go line by line on everything. Instead, I've organized the slides in a little bit of a different manner, which will allow us to go through the entire chapter in one video rather than do one section in a video and then the other and then the other. This will make studying a little bit faster. If you notice that it's going too fast, just hit the pause button on YouTube, slow it down, get yourself caught up, and do your best just to take everything in. Don't get so overwhelmed by getting every little word. Just take in the history, enjoy the history, love the history, and then you will do well on the test. Alright, so Chapter 8, it all revolves around a war. Things are really going pretty okay in the United States, especially regarding the issue of slavery. In 1820, we had the Missouri Compromise, maintaining a balance of power between the slave states in the South and the free states in the North. And as far as slavery goes, things are, or at least the debates over slavery between North and South, things are going as well as possibly could, until we get land. And where do we get land from? We get it from the Mexican War. All of these new territories acquired, especially in the southwestern part of the United States, are probably eventually become states. And then the question is, what type of states will they become? Will they give the slave states all the power or the free states all the power? Well, the journey begins with the Compromise of 1850. Here's the first plan in this journey of compromise and eventually of civil war. The question revolves around California. California gets lots of settlers because there's lots of gold in California. In 1848, gold is discovered. By 1849, you have enough settlers to make California apply for statehood. That is why the San Francisco 49ers are called the 49ers. That's why there is the color gold in their helmets, because of the history of the state. All right, forget football. Let's talk about history. You've got a ton of people in California, and follow my cursor. This would be the Missouri Compromise line. Remember that 3630 line? All the way over here would split California in half. So this is a big question. What is California going to be? Is it going to be free or is it going to be slave? Now, the Californians themselves, they have no need for slavery. Their economy isn't based on cotton or tobacco. Their economy is based on mining for gold. So they request to go in as a free state. And in the Compromise of 1850, which is proposed by Henry Clay, but then he goes away, and then this guy Douglas is actually who gets it through. Don't worry about that. Worry about the details of it. The details is that California will become a free state. Ding, 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 ding. That's a big win for the North. That's a big win for the free state crowd. But the other concession is going to be a kind of concession and then a really big concession to the South. The kind of gift to the South is that the Utah and New Mexico territories, the southwestern territories over here, they will get to decide by popular sovereignty. If the people vote for slavery, they get slavery. If they vote to be free, then that territory will be free. Now, the South probably still doesn't like that, because if you remember, the Missouri Compromise line would go right through here, and they should automatically become slave. So the gift to the South, and it's not a very good gift, is the Fugitive Slave Act. This is the other part of the Compromise of 1850. What the Fugitive Slave Act does is it is a very, very strong law that looks to find runaway slaves who have gone into the Northeast and ship them back to the South and return them to their slave masters who they've run away from. Now, one of the things that makes the Fugitive Slave Act so strong is that citizens are forced to report any runaway slaves. They don't just say, oh, I think that's a runaway, but I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to get involved. No, they have to get involved. They have to send that individual to a slave catcher and then eventually into the South. And this greatly, greatly upsets people in the Northeast, because they think, well, I used to kind of sit on the sidelines. Now I'm forced to take part in an issue that I disagree with. So what looked on the surface to help the South, because these runaway slaves would come back south, actually hurts them, because public opinion shifts against slavery, because these northeastern whites felt like they were being forced to deal with the issue of slavery, which they really did not want to deal with at all. Okay. So there's the Compromise of 1850. And obviously it has its ups and its downs, but it does chug the country along slowly but surely. until 1854 when we have the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Now, let's look at our line right here. Ready? You remember this, Missouri Compromise coming right through here. Any territory above would be free. Well, new territories are going to get organized. The Kansas Territory and then the Nebraska Territory. There it is. Nebraska, Kansas, all this area up here. So this should be free. Now, this is really going to anger Southern slaveholders and the slave South itself, because this is going to be new. There's going to be 4 senators here, 2 from Kansas, 2 from Nebraska, that would vote against slavery. So here's what it says. The Kansas-Nebraska Act repealed the Missouri Compromise line. Forget the Missouri Compromise, it doesn't matter. And created Kansas to line up exactly with Missouri. You see that? Now, granted, Kansas is wider, but the line itself is very close to the northern Missouri border of the Kansas border. So the 2 would decide by popular sovereignty. Kansas would decide if they wanted slavery. Nebraska would decide if they wanted slavery. Now, it's obvious looking at the map that that Nebraska is going to pick not to have slavery, but Kansas probably will go for slavery because of how it lines up with Missouri. So, popular sovereignty begins. Vote, vote, vote. Everybody's going to vote. Decide if they want to have slavery or not slavery. Nebraska votes no slavery. No surprise there. What happens in Kansas is that people from Missouri actually go over to Kansas and vote illegally in the Kansas election. They get the name Border Ruffians or Bushwhackers. Missouri bushwhackers come over to Kansas and not just say, oh, hi, I'd like to vote. Okay, vote. I'll go back to Missouri now. No, they bring guns with them. They bring torches with them. They set entire towns on fire. And there's like a civil war happening 6 years before a civil war will actually happen between Kansas and Missouri. Now, this is gets Kansas the name Bleeding Kansas because of the vote that happens. Ultimately, Kansas will, just to give you a forward look into what will happen with this, Kansas gets a pro-slavery constitution. But everybody knows it was a joke because Missouri went over and illegally voted for it. It gets rejected and thrown back to the Kansas voters who vote a second time. This time, Missouri doesn't interfere, and they vote to go in as a free state. So slavery never actually moves above the line, but for a while, it looked like that exactly is what was going to happen. Another thing, new political party comes out of this whole mess. The Republican Party is formed through the debate over the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And the platform of the Republican Party, what they believe, is that there should be absolutely no slavery in the territories. They're not saying that there should be no slavery at all. They're just making the argument, if we're going out west, we got these new lands, no way, do not spread the slavery. All right, now kind of churning along here. We got our Kansas-Nebraska Act. We got Bleeding Kansas. Oh, no. 3 years later, we have a huge bump in the road with the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott on our left here. Dred Scott is a slave to a Missouri slave owner. The Missouri slave owner takes the entire operation to a free territory for 10 years, where Dred Scott says, wait, 10 years, I'm in a free territory, there's no slaves, then I'm not a slave. So Dred Scott sues for his freedom. It goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, where Supreme Court Chief Justice, the very handsome Roger B. Taney from Maryland, decides against Dred Scott. He says, number one, Dred Scott is an African American, and because he's an African American, he's not a citizen. And if he's not a citizen, he has no rights. If he doesn't have any rights, then he cannot sue. So this case is void. So he totally throws the case out, says Dred Scott, back to slavery. Now, if he just did that, that would be a big strike to slavery. But he did more than that. He said that not only is Dred Scott a slave, but Congress cannot interfere with the spread of slavery into the territories. All this stuff about popular sovereignty or making sure that certain states are free is unconstitutional, according to the Supreme Court and according to Roger B. Taney, because slavery should be allowed to be spread because it is a right of the people of the United States. Now, this will go down as arguably the most ugly, embarrassing Supreme Court case in American history, and it rattles the country and pushes us closer and closer to civil war. Lincoln-Douglas debates. Short, let's say 1 year. 1 year after the Dred Scott decision, there's a Senate seat that is open in Illinois, and a young Republican, new Republican, used to be a Whig, Abraham Lincoln, is debating against Democrat Stephen A. Douglas. And the whole debate centered around the spread of slavery. Douglas emphasized his belief in popular sovereignty, while Lincoln argued that slavery was morally wrong and should not be spread into the territories. This is where Abraham Lincoln gives his famous House Divided speech, his prediction that the United States cannot remain half slave and half free. It'll become all one thing or all the other. Now, Stephen Douglas is going to win the Lincoln-Douglas debates, but Abraham Lincoln is going to make clear the principles of the Republican Party and also will be established as a politician with strong debating ability, which he has. All right, shifting gears, here's a big one. Mr. John Brown. John Brown, 1859, gets the idea in his head that it is time to lead. It's time to end slavery. Okay, and he's the man to do it. God sent John Brown to end slavery. That's why God allowed John Brown to have this intimidating beard. And with this intimidating beard, John Brown gathered a number of his sons and went to Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Now it's West Virginia, but then it was Virginia, where there was a federal arsenal, where there was a number of guns. His men invaded the arsenal, took control of it for several hours, where eventually local townspeople attacked John Brown. Also came some Marines led by then Colonel Robert E. Lee. John Brown's slave revolt was put down, but they did have control of a federal arsenal, and John Brown's plan was to take all these guns, give them to slaves, and lead a slave revolt that would have completely wiped out slavery in the United States. John Brown was hung days afterwards, and some Northerners viewed John Brown's death as viewed him as a martyr in the cause against slavery, while Southerners were outraged and saw it as an example of how violent Northerners were looking to incite slave rebellions and have their slaves kill them, because that is what John Brown wanted. John Brown, 1859, he is going to greatly affect the results of the election of 1860. We've got Abraham Lincoln. Remember that guy, the loser who lost in 1858 in Illinois? Well, he's running as a Republican. Stephen Douglas as a Democrat. John Breckinridge as a Southern Democrat. You see there's been a split in the Democratic Party. And John Bell, who ran as a constitutionalist. He picked up some states in the middle. The Southern Democrat, Breckinridge, got all the states in the South. But if you look up north, and even out west, but especially in the north, Abraham Lincoln dominates the election of 1860. Now, he did not say that he was going to run to end slavery totally, but he did say that he was going to attempt to end the extension of slavery into the territories. Look at this map. Examine how, if you're in the north, you're going for Lincoln. If you're in the deep south, you're going for Breckinridge. You can really see that where you were, sectional feelings, sectional influences greatly determined the vote of the electorate in the election of 1860, which in a lot of ways is still the way it is today. Okay, maybe I should back up actually a little bit. With Lincoln's election, many Southerners fear that this is the end to slavery, that Abraham Lincoln, especially what he said in that House Divided speech, is going to go ahead and put the plans in motion to end slavery. And in February of 1860, we see the secession of the lower South states. These are the deep south of South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia. They leave the Union. Up here, border states, upper South, they haven't left. It is just the deep south. Now, South Carolina right here, about right over here is a fort called Fort Sumter. South Carolina said, it's ours. The United States said, nope, it's ours. It was being refortified by the United States. And so then eventually the South said, hey, give it up. They didn't. And the South fired on it. Fort Sumter was fired on April 12th, 1861. After a long bombardment, it did surrender to the South, so the South won the first conflict of the Civil War, which is what Fort Sumter was. Afterwards, Abraham Lincoln calls for 75,000 volunteers for 90 days of service. That's 3 months. That's how people viewed the Civil War would last. The call to troops greatly upset the Upper South, and then they seceded. Who would I mean the Upper South? I'm talking about Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas. You can see those dates happened after Lincoln's call for troops. Also, the border states of Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri Abraham Lincoln is going to try very hard to preserve them in the Union throughout the Civil War. Remember those facts and check out Chapter 9 next.